And the third image is someone that actually does.
Hey folks, I hope you're all feeling good. It's towards the end of the day. Good? Good feeling? Nods? Good? Excellent. It's great to hear that you're feeling good. I'm really enjoying this conference. This conference is excellent. I don't have much time, so I'm going to jump right into it. So I'm here to talk about diversity in design. I'm going to be covering topics like illustration, photography, UI and UX. These are a lot of my own experiences and a lot of examples and stories that I've had throughout my career that I'm going to be covering. So you're going to hear a lot of different stories. It presents a lot of questions. Hope that it continues to answer some of those questions as well as ask a lot more. But every time I've done this talk, I've had more new questions come up, more things to debate. So, you know, it's a developing talk. Just going to recap the content warnings. So there's some talk about misgendering, ableism, racism, visual representations of transgender people, LGBTQIA plus representation, and ageism. So if anyone ever feels uncomfortable within a talk, please don't hesitate to exit. It's that kind of safe space. So tools are never completely neutral, and their settings reflect the cultural bias of the technicians that calibrate them. This is an extract from this book, Politics of Design. So this really sums up the kinds of things that I've been thinking about in my 9 years of a design career. Before we jump into that, just a little bit about me. My name's Errol. It's got an I in it. Sometimes people pronounce the I, but that's totally fine. I'm a designer. I've had many different design job titles in my career, too many to list out. I'm a non-binary person. I'm trans, regardless of what people may think I look like. I use they, them, their pronouns, and I use I think this is called the suffix, prefix. I use mix instead of miss, Mrs, or Mr. I'm a queer person, and I have an invisible disability. I have PTSD. The thing that I actually realized that I neglect to put on this slide is I actually am a carer of one terminally ill parent, used to be, and I am the carer of one very chronically ill parent as well. So we always forget the kinds of things that represent ourselves. Need to add that onto this slide. So where I work at Ushahidi. We're a humanitarian NGO tech company. We're a non-profit. We make open source tools for crisis response, human rights, democracy. I'm not going to go into too much about what Ushahidi does specifically, but if you're interested afterwards, come and talk to me about things like tech in natural and man-made disasters, how to keep your team safe when there's a terrorist attack, tech for peace building in places like Rwanda and Kenya, where we work a lot, and how people can help each other, how we can use tech for people that want to help each other post a crisis. So those are the kinds of things that I work on day to day at Ushahidi. But yeah, let's dive into the representation, the design representations of people and how we can be more diverse. So I'm going to talk a bit about illustration first. So this was a piece of illustration that I created for a company that I used to work at that made parental control tech software for parents to monitor what their kids were doing on their phones. They were doing a campaign, blog campaign. They wanted some illustrations created for them. This is one of the first times where I was like, I want to start including more diverse representations in the work that I do. So I'm just going to describe this image really briefly. We've got a mix of different skin tones. We've actually got some people in the center of this image. Just a little close up. The one on the left-hand side here has some kind of hearing aid type device in the ear. And this person on the right-hand side of this slide has a red and white striped cane and some glasses, which indicates the cane that is often used by deaf-blind people. I actually had this recommendation given to me by my partner who works at an assistive technology company. So broadening my own personal inclusion in who I associate with gave me this idea to want to include this. So of 7 illustrations that I created for this piece of work for this company, this one did not get used. These ones did. And this was one of my first introductions into what I call awkward conversations. So conversations are very scary sometimes when we're talking about how to represent people accurately, well, and inclusively. And when I was having these conversations with my colleagues at the time, I started gesturing to the image and saying, why aren't we including this image? You briefed an image of a family doing a conga line for Christmas shopping. I included a family of many different kinds of demographics. Is there something particularly wrong with what I've created? Or let's have a conversation about what I've created. It sort of skirted around the issues. You know, nobody was particularly comfortable drawing attention to what I suspected was the main issue of it. And at that point, I picked my battles to, great, we've included some perhaps skin color diversity within this. I'll have a further conversation about the inclusivity of people with disabilities, visible disabilities, and also I had similar conversations later on about same-sex couples. So some conversations are easier to have than others. I've found personally that the conversation you can have about including more racial diversity is an obvious one. The benefits are very obvious, especially when you can have metrics to back up that. With this product, a lot of our customers were customers that were African-American families, so it seemed ridiculous to not be including them in our marketing representation. So I'm going to move on quickly to another example. This is actually an Ushahidi example. This is a very good example of me being very ignorant and how I tried to deal with that ignorance. So we had a campaign where we were working with an organization which is a HIV and AIDS prevention organization, and we were delivering a set of services and some work in the East African countries that Ushahidi often works in. They wanted a poster to put up in clinics so that the people that were accessing these services could know how to give their feedback. So one treatment for that was an illustrated version. I had some personal issues around the extra use of pink and purple and very feminine coded colors here, but I was working to our brand guidelines. There was also want to include some photography within this, and I was like, I've never been at this point in time to any of these East African countries that I'm trying to accurately represent within this work that I'm doing. So I did some research. I went on the site of the people that we were working with on the organization. I picked out a few different photos to use. And alongside these photos that were being used in other places, I thought about I tried to think a bit wider. I tried to ask myself a question, because I was feeling a bit uneasy when I was looking at these pictures. Are these just the kinds of pictures that myself would expect to see within this setting? So I actually went on Google image search. I searched for specifically Nairobi nightlife because I kind of wanted to understand what Nairobi was like in nightlife. I went on Instagram. I looked through lots of different hashtags to see what people dressed like, acted like, did in these countries that I had no direct experience of, that I was trying to accurately design for. I included some of these images in one of my treatments, and I also included images like these, which are the ones that I found on stock sites after having done the research on Instagram and Google image search. I was very nervous, but I straight up asked my colleagues that were based in these countries, what do you think of these images? Please tell me whether they accurately represent what you need them to represent. And because we had cultivated this culture of openness to be able to have these conversations in Ushahidi, they were able to tell me, please no pictures of young girls carrying buckets in arid landscapes. This is much more accurate. I had a suspicion that this was more accurate based on my research, but being able to ask my colleagues for that confirmation, even though getting over the nervousness was tough at times, sometimes we have to get over that nervousness as designers to accurately represent the people that we want to design for. I don't have time to go into it in much depth, but I also did a piece of work around looking at what stock sites send back to you when you type in the search for a transgender person. I'm just going to describe a couple of these images. Some of them make me very uneasy. We've got one in the bottom right-hand corner around with a person who has a beard with also red nails and red lipstick, but they're making like a shushing quiet sound. We've got one in the middle, which is sort of somebody holding a picture of a body that presumably has a bra and feminine underwear and breasts. The main issue that I have with these images, and the reason that I put up them here just to draw attention to them, is because unless you're asking those questions of yourself when you're designing these and making these pieces of work, these websites, these products to represent people, there are people that could be entering information into stock photography sites or places to get resources that think that this is perhaps an accurate representation of the people that they're trying to reach out to for their products. So we need to do better on our resources. Thankfully, I've got some resources at the end that you can take a look at that I think are very, very good. We need to also get away from this default thinking that this is what a X person looks like. This is what a trans person will look like. This is what a lesbian will look like. This is what a man looks like. It's a very default thinking that says like straight, white, male, thin, able-bodied, so on, so forth. And it's just not representative of the vast diversity that we have in the world that we need to include. Going to move on to user experience and UI to some extent. This is real. This was a real piece of feedback within a design workshop from somebody that I worked with. It says feminizing the experience, if you can even kind of think what that means in your own brains. Like feminizing the experience could mean so many different things to so many different people. What I like to think of UX as is it's about making products usable, relevant, and simple for anyone to use. And I remember this conversation specifically started off as the worry that this product wasn't doing well with our female demographic. Women weren't buying the product, they weren't investing in the product, all these kind of worries. And we went through the typical kind of conversations that some people also may find familiar around, do we make the interface all pink? That was an actual word said in actual meeting. But it was a good opportunity to challenge that thinking and get down to the actual root cause of what we needed to achieve. And I finally managed to get them down to the statement of, we just want to make it more female friendly. And I said back to them, why not friendly without the female part? What does friendly mean without this added extra gendering? It turns out that what we really needed to do with the product is make it less task-based, less like a job-like interface, and more like a recreational, lifestyle style, easy-to-use interface, basically. It was too much like hardware, like your Microsoft Word, and less like a app that you could use in very short bursts. UX becomes really, really difficult when you kind of bring it up against this kind of marketing side of things. And this conversation that I was having around the UX was really coming up against this kind of marketing. How do we make it more appeal to X person or this person or that person? And the reason that I show these images in this talk, what we've got here is a example of the hashtag masculinity is so fragile that they need to gender everyday items. We've got men's tea, men's chapstick, men's ultimate multi-tool, which are cotton swabs for your ears, men's sunscreen specifically, and then on the side, the thing that baffles me the most are tissues, man-sized tissues, and then just regular tissues that are ultra soft, but men's tissues aren't ultra soft. And it boggles the mind for me, and we laugh about these things because sometimes we have to laugh about them, otherwise we would be devastated by them. But it boggles the mind that men wouldn't want their tissues to be ultra soft because presumably you have a really sore nose and you want your soft, anyway, yeah. Bizarre. But the serious note about these items that draws back to UX is imagine yourself as somebody who is going through a transition as a transgender person, and you come up against products like these, which essentially this is excluding people from saying you should not be buying these unless you're X. You should not be part of this product, this service, this thing that could actually be really beneficial to you because you've got a runny nose because you are X. And I'd like us to think more about how we're specifically excluding people around those demographics if we're using and relying on these kinds of things. going to move into some of my UI suggestions and some of the things that I've come across, basically, as a person who's transitioned to some extent. So what we've got at the top here, we've got a person who I applied for a CRB check, a DBS check, which are now called, and this person has used the phrase, "Is that your real name?" When I've had to apply for this CRB check, DBS check with my legal name, which is the name that is still on my passport, but the name that I go by is Errol. I would highly recommend you never refer to a legal name or a name on identification as somebody's real name and the name that they go by as not their real name by omission. Also, this is another source of intense pain for me. So we've got I wanted to go to a gaming event. I love video games. Matching ID will be required for ticket collection. This makes me sweat when I read this in forms, because I then have to fill this massive, this is like a paragraph of text in this one small form field where I'm like, my preferred name is this, but my legal name is this, so I'm gonna have to bring this. Is that okay? Often I have to actually email the person who's organizing the event and say, is this okay? What should I bring? Do I need to bring a deed poll? Do I need to bring this? You know, if you don't have to ask for it, if it's not a requirement, they could just bring their ticket. If you don't have to ask for ID, then don't. Make sure that you're asking for the things that you definitely need and think about the wider implications around these kinds of people with these kinds of challenges. Here's a few examples, one of which I'd like to draw on specifically. And what we've got here on the left-hand side is how to identify your ethnicity. We've got a checkbox as opposed to just a radio button because people can identify as multiple ethnicities. Not a lot of people realize that some people out there want to identify as multiple ethnicities. This is actually from an amazing article by somebody that I used to be part of, She Nomads group, Sarai. Here's the link. You can get the slides afterwards and have a read. But these are some of the ones that I collect as I go through different forms in my life. So one of my biggest ones around gender is the prefer not to say option as opposed to female and male, and the none of your business. So I've only recently in the last year to 2 years started identifying as who I want to be, as a non-binary person, as a queer person, as part of the LGBTQ spectrum. I've been closeted for all my life up until then. I would really like to say, I would prefer to say, because I'm very proud of the point in my life of which I've been able to come to now. So I want to tell you that I'm not male or female. I would prefer to say, please give me an option to say. I will happily tell you. But this is a good example of where sometimes these forms can get too long or potentially too long. If this is applicable, great, but think about it before you offer multiple options if that's what you need to collect. That's my time. We've heard a lot about edge cases. I've often heard it be called as we can't please everybody. One of the great ways I like to refer to edge cases in my workplace is as stress cases. So these are the people that need our empathy and attention the most, and these are often our marginalized groups. And I've got one final slide, which is a statement that I'll read out. So I believe as designers, we are at the forefront of how products serve users, but also how the digital and physical world represents and reflects back at users. We have a responsibility to be inclusive, sensitive, and understanding with what we design and endeavour to help the non-marginalised folk foster their acceptance and expose them to systems that include rather than exclude. This is what I would love to happen. This is what I try to do every day in my design practice. And just to finish on, a list of excellent resources, lots of stuff about pronoun tips here on this link, an amazing podcast, some really great stock photography of people of colour in tech that's free to use. And all of these books, very much recommend that you take the time to read these if you can. And that's me done.
Thank you, Errol. Thank you. So, when you wake up in the morning,